Whispers in 1884. London claimed Arthur Montgomery, the 9th Duke of Wycliffe, possessed a clockwork mechanism where his heart should be. Genevieve Hastings thought she could outsmart this ruthless nobleman with a simple paper marriage to save her dying sister. She was catastrophically wrong. Genevieve stood in the oppressive rain-lashed courtyard of Oakhaven, clutching a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. The grand estate, which had been in the Hastings family for 4 generations, was practically rotting from the inside out. Since her father, Lord Thomas Hastings, had taken his own life in his velvet-draped study 6 months prior, the crushing weight of his hidden gambling debts had collapsed upon her. The creditors had stripped Oakhaven of its silver, its art, and its warmth. But the loss of material wealth meant nothing to Genevieve. It was the frantic, rasping cough echoing from the upstairs nursery that tore her soul apart. Her younger sister Clara was dying of consumption. Dr. Harrison had been explicitly clear during his last unpaid visit. If Clara was not sent to the high-altitude sanatoriums in Switzerland before the winter frost set in, she would not live to see the spring. Genevieve needed £3,000 to clear the immediate debts and secure Clara's passage. She might as well have needed the moon. That was when the sleek, black carriage, bearing the ducal crest of Wycliffe, rolled through the rusted iron gates of Oakhaven. Arthur Montgomery, the Duke of Wycliffe, was a man of terrifying influence and unfathomable wealth. At 32, he dominated the House of Lords. He was notoriously austere, a man who never smiled, never danced at the season's balls, and never entertained the breathless advances of London's most eligible debutantes. He was also currently embroiled in a vicious scandal. Rumours had spread that the Duke was involved in an illicit, highly treasonous affair with the wife of a French diplomat. Whispers in Parliament threatened to strip him of his political seat unless he proved himself a stable, respectable English gentleman. He needed a flawless aristocratic wife, and he needed her immediately. Genevieve sat across from him in the freezing, stripped-bare drawing-room of her home. Arthur Montgomery was a striking man with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the colour of a winter ocean, pale, fathomless, and utterly freezing. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He withdrew a crisp, beautifully calligraphed document from his leather portfolio and slid it across the mahogany table. "The terms are simple, Lady Genevieve." Arthur's voice was a low, aristocratic drawl that commanded absolute obedience. "You require funds to save your sister and salvage your family's disgraced name. I require a wife to stand by my side at public functions and silence the tedious gossip of the aristocracy. We will be married for exactly 2 years. You will reside in my estates, wear my family jewels, and play the part of a devoted duchess." Genevieve stared at the heavy parchment. "And in return," Arthur continued, his gaze unwavering, "I will settle your father's remaining debts. I will establish a trust of £50,000 in your name. And most importantly, my personal physician will escort Clara to the finest medical facility in Geneva tomorrow morning. Her care will be entirely subsidized for the remainder of her life." Genevieve's breath hitched. It was a king's ransom. It was salvation. But her aristocratic pride made her hesitate. "A marriage in name only, Your Grace. I must have your word on that. I will not be a true wife to a man I do not love." Arthur's expression did not change, though a strange, imperceptible shadow flickered in his pale blue eyes. He pointed a gloved finger to the bottom of the page. "Read Clause 4, Lady Genevieve." She leaned in her eyes, scanning the elegant script. Clause 4. No physical intimacy shall be expected, requested, or demanded by either party. The marriage shall remain strictly platonic with separate bedchambers maintained at all residences. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, washed over her. It was a business transaction. Nothing more. She picked up the heavy gold fountain pen he offered her. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name, binding her life to the most feared man in England. The wedding took place 3 days later at St. George's, Hanover Square. There were no flowers, no joyous hymns, and no weeping family members. Genevieve wore a borrowed ivory silk gown that felt more like armor than a bridal dress. Arthur stood beside her, clad in stark black, an impenetrable fortress of a man. When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, Arthur did not lift her veil. He merely offered his arm, his touch burning, with an unexpected searing heat through the fabric of her sleeve. "It is done," he murmured softly, leading her down the empty aisle. Genevieve nodded, clutching her bouquet of white roses, so tightly the thorns bit into her palms. Clara was already on a train to Switzerland. The debts were gone. She had survived. All she had to do now was endure 2 years of quiet, polite indifference. She had no idea that her nightmare was only just beginning. The journey from London to the Montgomery ancestral seat was a grueling 3-day carriage ride. Genevieve had expected to be taken to his opulent estate in Sussex, but as the carriage rattled violently over cobblestones and dirt paths, the landscape grew wilder, darker, and increasingly desolate. They were heading deep into the rugged, tempestuous cliffs of Cornwall. When the carriage finally lurched to a halt, Genevieve peered through the rain-streaked window and felt the blood drain from her face. Pendergast Keep was not a manor. It was a fortress. Carved from dark, unforgiving stone, the estate perched precariously on the edge of a jagged cliff overlooking the violently churning black waters of the Celtic Sea. It looked less like a home, and more like a high-security prison. "Welcome to Pendergast Duchess," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the sound of the howling wind. They were greeted in the cavernous entrance hall by a small army of stone-faced servants. The head housekeeper, a severe woman named Mrs. Hemsley, bowed deeply. "Take the Duchess to her chambers," Arthur commanded, unfastening his heavy wool riding cloak. "She is exhausted from the journey. Dinner will be served in my private quarters at 8. "Yes, Your Grace," Mrs. Hemsley replied. Genevieve followed the housekeeper up a massive, winding marble staircase. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries and the unsmiling portraits of previous Montgomery dukes. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and wood smoke, yet the corridors felt suffocatingly cold. "Here we are, Your Grace," Mrs. Hemsley said, opening a set of heavy, intricately carved double oak doors. Genevieve stepped inside and froze. The room was breathtakingly opulent, draped in rich burgundy velvets and dark mahogany. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the center of the room, flanked by 2 towering stone fireplaces. But it was not the grandeur that made her heart pound with sudden icy terror. It was the distinct smell of sandalwood and tobacco. It was the heavy silver grooming set on the vanity. This was a man's room. She turned to Mrs. Hemsley, her voice trembling slightly. "There has been a mistake. These are the Duke's chambers. My contract expressly stated I was to have separate quarters." Mrs. Hemsley's expression remained entirely blank. "There is no mistake, Your Grace. The Duke gave explicit instructions that your trunks were to be unpacked here, in the master suite." Before Genevieve could protest further, the housekeeper bowed and stepped backward into the hallway, pulling the heavy oak doors shut. The sound of the lock sliding heavily into place echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Genevieve lunged forward, grabbing the brass handle. She twisted it frantically, rattling the heavy doors. "Mrs. Hemsley, open this door. Open it at once!" Silence answered her. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She paced the massive room, checking the windows. They were locked tight, heavy iron latches rusted shut against the violent coastal winds, and a sheer 80-foot drop to the crashing rocks below offered no escape. She was trapped. Hours bled away into the evening. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, menacing shadows across the walls. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lock disengaged with a heavy clack. Arthur Montgomery stepped into the room. He had changed out of his travelling clothes into a tailored black evening jacket, looking every inch the aristocratic predator. He carried a silver tray holding 2 crystal glasses and a decanter of amber liquid. "You locked me in," Genevieve whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of terror and absolute fury. "What is the meaning of this, our contract?" "Ah, yes, the contract." Arthur walked slowly toward the fireplace, setting the tray down on a side table. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew the folded parchment she had signed 3 days ago. He didn't even look at it. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the document directly into the roaring flames. Genevieve gasped, lunging forward, but Arthur caught her wrist in a grip of iron. His touch was no longer cold. It was burning, possessive, and terrifyingly strong. "What are you doing?" she screamed, struggling against his grip. "You promised. We had an agreement." Clause 4. Arthur jerked her effortlessly against his chest. The sheer power radiating from him left her breathless. He looked down at her, and the carefully constructed mask of the stoic, indifferent politician shattered completely. His eyes were entirely unhinged, burning with a dark, obsessive hunger that made her blood run cold. "Did you honestly believe," Arthur murmured, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, "that I would pay £50,000 for a piece of paper, Genevieve? Did you truly think a man of my resources needed to resort to a public marriage to quiet a few gossiping lords in Parliament?" Genevieve stared up at him, her chest heaving. The scandal, the French diplomat's wife. A dark, terrifying smile curved his lips. A fabrication, planted by my own men to give me an excuse to seek a bride so hastily. Genevieve's mind spun violently. "Why?" she choked out. "Why would you do this? Because you were slipping away from me," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, possessive whisper. He raised his free hand, tracing the line of her trembling jaw with a reverent, almost maddeningly gentle touch. "I have watched you for 3 years, Genevieve. I watched you dance at the Duke of Devonshire's ball in a sapphire dress that I still see every time I close my eyes. I watched you refuse 4 suitors. I watched you hide away in Oakhaven." He leaned closer, his breath hot against her skin. "I was a patient man. I waited for you to come to London, to enter society properly, so I could court you. But then your fool of a father squandered your dowry and shot himself. You were going to run away to the countryside. You were going to disappear." Realization hit Genevieve with the force of a physical blow. The debts, the aggressive creditors who had suddenly demanded payment all at once, forcing her hand. "Baron Alistair," she whispered in horror. "He wasn't acting alone." "I bought your father's debts the day after his funeral," Arthur confessed, showing no remorse whatsoever. "I ordered Alistair to squeeze you. I orchestrated every single moment of your financial ruin so that when I arrived with a carriage and a solution, you would have no choice but to take my hand." Genevieve felt her knees buckle, but Arthur's iron grip kept her standing, plastered against his chest. Her entire life, her father's despair, the terror of Clara's illness, it had all been a chess game played by a madman who had decided he wanted her as his prize. "You are a monster." She breathed tears of pure fury spilling over her lashes. "I will scream. I will tell the magistrates. You cannot keep me here against my will." "You are my wife," Arthur replied, his voice ringing with chilling finality. "Before God, before the law, and before the world. There is no one in England who can take you from me. The doors of Pendergast Keep are locked. Genevieve and the staff answers only to me. You are mine. He released her wrist only to wrap his arm securely around her waist, pulling her flush against him. There is no fake marriage. There never was. You will sleep in my bed, you will bear my children, and you will be my true wife in every sense of the word. And we are not leaving this room until you accept that. For 7 days and 7 nights, the master suite of Pendergast Keep became a battleground of wills. Genevieve did not weep, nor did she cower. The revelation of Arthur's terrifying, obsessive manipulation had burned away her fear, leaving behind only a hardened crystalline fury. She dragged a heavy mahogany chaise lounge across the door of the adjoining dressing room, barricading herself inside at night. Arthur allowed it. He did not force the door, nor did he lay a violent hand upon her. Instead, he waged a war of psychological attrition, suffocating her with his relentless, magnetic presence. He took his meals in the suite with her. He read his parliamentary dispatches by the fire, his pale blue eyes tracking her every movement with the predatory patience of a coiled serpent. He showered her with breathtaking displays of wealth gowns of Parisian silk, heavy diamond parures, and first-edition novels, all of which Genevieve stubbornly ignored, wearing the same simple grey day dress until the cuffs began to fray. "You cannot starve me of my sanity, Arthur," she snapped on the 8th evening, glaring at him across the grand dining table set for 2. "I am not a prized mare to be broken." Arthur slowly lowered his crystal goblet of claret. "I do not wish to break you, Genevieve. I wish to protect you. The world outside these walls is chaotic, treacherous, and cruel. I have secured your sister's life, and now I have secured yours. By holding me hostage, by keeping you out of the crossfire," he corrected his tone, dropping to a dangerous gravelly register. He stood pacing slowly toward her side of the table. "You think me a monster for my methods, but you do not understand the political predators of London. Prime Minister Gladstone himself has enemies who would slit a throat for a single vote in the House of Lords. Last month, Inspector Frederick Aberline of Scotland Yard intercepted a package addressed to my London townhouse. It contained enough dynamite to level the entire street." Genevieve froze, the breath catching in her throat. Inspector Aberline was a legendary, notoriously private figure. If he was involved, the threat was devastatingly real. Arthur leaned down, his knuckles bracing against the table as he trapped her in his intense, suffocating gaze. "My political rivals, men like Lord Harrington, know that I cannot be bribed, bought, or intimidated. They have been searching for a weakness to exploit. If I had courted you openly in London, you would have been a target. I engineered your financial ruin to remove you from society's eye, to force you into my protection, before they even knew you existed. I made you a duchess in the shadows, so I could bring you to my fortress. You destroyed my life," she whispered, her voice trembling with conflicting emotions. "I destroyed a fragile illusion." He countered softly, lifting a hand to brush a stray curl from her cheek. His touch sent an involuntary, treacherous shiver down her spine. "And I gave you an empire in return. You are safe here. You will always be safe." Before Genevieve could formulate a response, the heavy oak doors of the suite echoed with a frantic, rhythmic knocking. "Your Grace!" Mrs. Hemsley's voice filtered through the thick wood, tight with unprecedented panic. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but it is urgent. Lord Harrington's carriage has just breached the lower gates. He is accompanied by 6 armed men, claiming he holds a royal warrant to audit the estate's naval shipping logs." Arthur's face hardened into a mask of pure, murderous rage. The romantic obsession vanished, replaced instantly by the ruthless Duke of Wycliffe. He straightened up, adjusting his cuffs with chilling precision. "They have come to search for the weakness," Arthur murmured, looking down at her. He reached into his pocket and produced a heavy brass key, tossing it onto the table. "Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me. If Harrington's men try to breach this room, shoot them through the wood." He gestured toward the mantel where a loaded, silver-plated revolver rested beside the clock. He didn't wait for her to reply. Arthur strode out of the room, slamming the heavy doors behind him. Genevieve sat in the deafening silence, staring at the brass key. For the first time in over a week, the doors were unlocked. Arthur had been so consumed by the sudden threat that he had left the key on her side of the lock. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. This was her chance. She grabbed a dark velvet cloak from the wardrobe, slipped the revolver into her pocket, and eased the heavy oak doors open. The corridor was deserted, the staff presumably summoned to the lower halls to deal with Harrington's arrival. Genevieve slipped into the shadows, moving swiftly down the servants' spiral staircase. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to escape the suffocating grip of Arthur Montgomery. But as she reached the ground floor, navigating the labyrinthine stone passages near the estate's armory, she heard hushed, urgent voices echoing from the adjoining courtyard. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, peering through a cracked iron grate. Lord Harrington, a bloated, cruel-faced aristocrat, stood in the torrential Cornish rain speaking to 3 heavily armed mercenaries. "The shipping logs are merely a distraction." Harrington hissed water dripping from his top hat. "The Duke will meet me in the main study. Once he is distracted, cut the telegraph lines. You 3 will enter through the terrace doors. Put a bullet in his chest and make it look like a botched robbery. If he has indeed hidden a new bride, here kill her too. Leave no witnesses to contest the title." Genevieve's blood ran cold. This wasn't a political maneuver. It was an assassination. She could run. The path to the cliffside, smuggling tunnels, was just a few yards away. She could disappear into the stormy night, secure a passage to France, with the diamonds currently resting on her dressing table, and reunite with Clara in Switzerland. Arthur would die, and she would be a wealthy, free widow. The man who had manipulated, trapped and forced her into marriage would be erased from her life. She took a step toward the exit. The wind howled, beckoning her to freedom. But as she touched the cold iron latch of the escape door, an agonizing image flashed in her mind. Arthur shielding her from the truth of the world. Arthur, whose burning touch held not just obsession, but a desperate, fractured need to protect her at all costs. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster. Genevieve tightened her grip on the silver revolver in her pocket. She turned her back on the exit and sprinted toward the main study. Lightning illuminated the grand halls of Pendergast Keep as Genevieve raced through the corridors. She burst into the antechamber just as the 3 mercenaries shattered the glass of the terrace doors, storming into the Duke's private study. "Arthur!" Genevieve screamed, leveling the heavy revolver with both hands. She pulled the trigger. The deafening crack of the gunshot echoed off the stone walls. One of the mercenaries cried out, clutching his shoulder as he stumbled backward. Arthur spun around, his eyes widening in pure shock at the sight of his captive bride standing in the doorway, a smoking gun in her hands. But his distraction was a fatal mistake. The second mercenary raised his rifle and fired. Arthur let out a sharp, breathless grunt as the bullet tore through his side. He collapsed against the mahogany desk, but the lethal instinct of a cornered predator took over. With blinding speed, he drew his own hidden weapon from his coat and fired twice, dropping the remaining 2 attackers instantly. The room fell deadly silent, save for the roar of the rain outside and Arthur's ragged, wet breathing. He slid down the front of the desk, his hand pressing against the rapidly blooming dark stain on his white shirt. "Arthur." Genevieve dropped the gun and rushed to his side, tearing off her cloak to press it violently against his wound. Her hands were shaking slick with his blood. "Help, somebody help us!" Arthur gripped her wrist, his strength fading fast. His pale eyes searched her panicked face, a look of profound, agonizing wonder crossing his sharp features. "You didn't run," he choked out, coughing up a spatter of blood. "The doors were unlocked, and you stayed." "Do not speak, you foolish man," Genevieve sobbed, applying more pressure. "You cannot die. I forbid it. Do you hear me? I forbid it." A faint ghost of a smile touched his pale lips before his eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness. The next 48 hours were a blur of screaming servants, frantic telegrams, and the pungent smell of ether. The local surgeon worked tirelessly to extract the bullet, but Arthur's fever spiked dangerously high. Genevieve never left his bedside. She dismissed Mrs. Hemsley, refusing to let anyone else bathe his forehead or administer the laudanum. As she watched him fight for his life, stripped of his terrifying power and aristocratic armor, Genevieve realized the horrifying truth. She did not hate him. The anger had burned out, leaving a complex, dark, and undeniable fire in its place. He had loved her with a madness that defied reason, and in a terrifying way, she was beginning to love the madness back. On the third morning, the fever finally broke. Genevieve was asleep in the chair beside the bed when she felt a weak, trembling hand brush against her fingers. She snapped awake. Arthur was looking at her, his pale eyes clear, though shadowed by exhaustion. "You are still here," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Where else would I be, Your Grace?" she replied softly, pouring a glass of water and holding it to his lips. Arthur drank greedily, then leaned back against the pillows. He looked at her for a long time, the walls of his obsessive control completely shattered by his brush with death. He slowly reached toward the bedside table, sliding open the top drawer. He pulled out 2 documents and pushed them weakly across the silk sheets toward her. Genevieve looked down. The first was a staggering bank draft for £100,000. The second was an official decree of annulment, already signed by Arthur, requiring only her signature to dissolve their marriage permanently. "I have lost," Arthur said, his voice laced with a devastating hollow defeat. "When I saw you standing in the doorway, when I realized you could have run but chose to save me instead, I realized the depth of my own cruelty. I tried to cage a hawk, Genevieve, and in doing so I nearly broke your wings." He closed his eyes, unable to bear the sight of her taking the papers. "Sign the annulment. The money is yours. The carriage will take you to the port at noon. You are free." Genevieve stared at the documents. Freedom, wealth, independence. Everything she had originally wanted was sitting right in front of her. She picked up the heavy gold fountain pen resting on the nightstand. Arthur flinched as he heard the scratching of the pen, his heart turning to lead. But Genevieve didn't sign her name. Instead, she methodically crossed out the text of the annulment with thick black slashes. She then picked up both documents and fed them into the dying embers of the fireplace, watching them curl into ash. Arthur's eyes snapped open, disbelief warring with sudden desperate hope. "Genevieve, what are you doing?" She walked back to the bed, her chin tilted up in a display of absolute regal authority. The terrified girl from Oakhaven was gone. The Duchess of Wycliffe had taken her place. "I am renegotiating our contract, Arthur," Genevieve said, her voice steady and commanding. She leaned over him, placing a hand gently over his bandaged chest. "Here are my new terms. First," she stated, her eyes locking onto his, "there will be no more secrets, no more manipulations. We face the enemies of this house together as equals." Dorbuse second war, she continued, a faint, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "You will rebuild my family estate, and Clara shall return there when she is healed." Third, and most importantly, she leaned in until her lips were mere inches from his, feeling the sudden erratic spike in his pulse. "You are never to lock a door on me again, because if you do, I will blast it off its hinges." Arthur stared up at her, completely captivated, completely disarmed, and utterly at her mercy. The ruthless Duke had finally been tamed not by force, but by the fierce, unyielding spirit of the woman he had tried to conquer. "Do you accept my terms, husband?" she whispered. Arthur reached up his hand, tangling in her loose hair, as he pulled her down into a bruising, desperate, and fiercely passionate kiss. "I accept my Duchess," he murmured against her lips, his voice thick with devotion. "I surrender completely. If this story of dark obsessions, twisted bargains, and a love fierce enough to tame a ruthless duke kept you on the edge of your seat, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, share this tale of dangerous romance with your friends, and hit subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most thrilling, heart-pounding historical dramas every single week. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a plot twist. See you in the next dramatic adventure.